Okay, thank you for joining. This is a very interesting topic that we're covering here on the webinar, joint webinar between Corelogix and Rookout on dynamic observability troubleshooting techniques for the new era of microservices and cloud. So in this webinar, we'll cover a few topics, talking about how to achieve better observability, how can machine learning help you become more proactive in how you monitor, and how can dynamic observability, such as dynamic breakpoints and configurable logging, help you accelerate your problem remediation and achieve better stability. Myself, I'll be moderating this webinar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Corelogix. We've been around for about 6 years now, serving over 2,000 customers worldwide, including some of the biggest brands in the world. What's unique about Corelogix is that we analyze all the data before it's ever indexed. We analyze tens of billions of events per day in real time and provide our customers with better, more accurate insights at much lower cost. With us here is Josh, Senior Solution Engineer at Rookout. Josh, you want to present yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Josh Hendrick. I'm part of the solution engineering team here at Rookout. We were founded just about 4 years ago now. And really the goal of Rookout, we'll get more into it as the presentation goes on, but is really to enable our customers to solve issues and defects much faster than they traditionally would by giving them insight into live data from their application as it's running.
And Peter, our solution engineer.
Thanks, Ariel. So I recently joined Corelogix from Splunk. So I'm based in the US and supporting the US sales team, and I'll be doing a demonstration of Corelogix in just a few minutes. Thanks, Ariel.
Of course. So what we're going to cover today, 3 main topics. 1, what to look for in a great SaaS observability vendor. Obviously, we're not the most objective ones because both are observability vendors, but we'll try to give a few key principles on modern observability and how we see a great vendor fit in your organization. We'll talk a little about how we use machine learning to improve the release of your software, basically make your CI/CD better, more accurate, and allow you to perform CI/CD without compromising quality or stability. And a bit about techniques like dynamic breakpoints or configurable logging that allow you to be prepared for the unknowns. So whenever you need that extra line of log, whenever you need that breakpoint in production that is impossible to do, there's now a solution that helps you do that and achieve much faster remediation. So the first topic is really broad, but I guess you two guys have quite a few ideas from customers and your experience, Peter, both here in Corelogix and prior. How do you choose a good SaaS observability platform? So we named a few points. Let's talk about them. And again, let's keep this an open discussion, everyone. Whenever there's a question, we'll look out for the Q&A section. Just ask away and we can have a conversation around it and you can share your own experience. Peter, what do you think that organization are expecting from observability tools today? What do you see from your experience?
Well, what I see over and over again is no one can afford to have any blind spots within their organization. It's so critical these days that I am able to take that data from all of the different systems, legacy and new and cloud and on-prem and co-located, and I can bring those into a central platform. And too often I see just barriers where possibly license, possibly, just simply the cost of the data, or if it's a specialized collector that's trying to actually take the information and bring that into the observability tool. It's just unfortunate that so many times it's things that shouldn't be barriers, are barriers. And then on top of that, it's so difficult for the teams today to observe and get all of that information directly. So I think we do need the assistance. I didn't mean to jump ahead there. We can certainly stay focused on the observability, but that ability is to see all of the systems and get the assistance through the AI and ML techniques.
Yeah. It's really interesting kind of, looking at the evolution of software development, right? Over the past 5 to 10 years, kind of where we've come from, right? Building these large scale monolithic applications to now a lot of organizations are adopting microservices approaches where you have these smaller components that are being deployed, and typically a lot more of them, right? Which brings about a much bigger need than ever for having proper observability tools within your architecture and within your environments, right? So, I think a lot of organizations that we talk to are adopting a lot of these new tools focused on getting them better insights into their application data, into their logs, into metrics, into traces, right? And I think there's just a large amount of money being spent on these things. So, and there's a lot of vendors that are popping up, trying to work in these different areas. So, I think every organization is trying to provide something new and something valuable. But I think the question to ask yourself, right, as somebody who is looking at bringing in new observability tools, right, is it has to provide some unique value or insight into your application data or into the way your application is running, or potentially errors that are happening, and allowing you to intelligently make decisions based on that data as to what to do next, right? Do you need to roll back a release? Do you need to kind of go in and quickly inspect what's happening to get a fix to your application, right? So this deep level of observability, I think we're seeing is becoming much more important as time goes on.
Yeah, I think another point to mention here when you're looking at an observability tool, one of the biggest questions for observability in general is build versus buy. And this is very interesting because no one asks on a CRM or a marketing tool, do we build or buy? Everyone just buy, right? Specifically for observability, because it's a dev tool that is used by developers and engineers, they like to build stuff. And so many of them are deciding to build their own stack for observability, use a few open sources, or maybe do some custom coding, and then create something that fits their needs, which sometimes is the right solution. I think when you look at the build versus buy dilemma here, one of the key aspects to mention, of course, besides, what Peter and Josh, you guys mentioned critical things, a tool that allows you to integrate with everything, doesn't overcharge you so you can get full coverage, of course, brings an additional value to your organization and business value, or allows you to track things automatically. But one very important thing is when I buy, is that something that helps me to not build or not handle this at all? So how much of a SaaS this product is? And, when there are different perspectives for SaaS, but many times SaaS is seen as software deployed on cloud, which is completely not true. So if I decided to already pay for a tool and not build something on my own, which many times comes out cheaper or maybe a closer fit to my organization, so I put that investment, which is heavy and expensive and distracting my business. If I decided to buy something, I'd expect it to give me everything as service. So software as a service is a little misleading. I would expect observability as a service. That means not only the software and the product, but handle my spikes. Give me 24/7 rapid support. Help me build that knowledge of observability into my organization, whether it's content that you create or rapid support, both on the product end. So I want a tool that I'm using to help me build my dashboards and alerts. And I want that data baked back into my organization, so I'm advancing my company. And I want to offload everything. So I want full SaaS. I don't need to think about the hardware or the underlying infrastructure. I want to basically send the data that I have and have that system handling it. So a good example for something that isn't true SaaS is software deployed on cloud, where you basically buy resources. So if I buy resources, I still have that mental burden of saying, okay, I paid for 8 cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM. How much data can that digest, and what performance that I'm going to have? So a vendor that gives me a way saying, just send your data, this is the price per unit, and we guarantee a specific SLA, a specific performance, the 24/7 support that you deserve, we'll make sure that you're successful. I think that is a critical part of choosing the right vendor or the right partner for observability, because observability is in the core of a business that you really want to partner and not someone that treats you like a customer or you treat like a vendor. What do you guys think? Peter, from your experience in the market, which is quite a few years now, what do you see?
Yeah, what you said is absolutely true. And so many times we see solutions that have simply been lifted to the cloud, and they don't really answer the needs for the customer. So for observability, the cloud native applications are absolutely going to win the day because of the elasticity of being able to scale up immediately, whether it's a few megabytes this day to petabytes someday. That is truly with a cloud native application, we can get that type of capability. And without that, we're back to the same problems of I ran out of space, I ran out of processor power, I ran out of however many I paid for, I reached that limit and now I'm done. And that just doesn't work today. There's just too many variables, and it's absolutely business critical that my customer always has a positive experience, whether it's directly with my company or through a mobile app or through a website. So that's we see that over and over again, and appreciate you bringing that out.
I guess it all comes down to I either build or buy. I don't want to be stuck in the middle where I bought, but now I also have to maintain and build. Josh?
Yeah. I think, if you're looking at why organizations will typically choose to build something on their own, right? They can guarantee that it's going to be interoperable with the tools that they're using today. Most organizations are also, something we haven't talked about yet, worried about security. If you build something on your own, you're trusting yourself. You're not putting your trust in another vendor. So I think as vendors in the space, those kind of have to be default things, right? You have to work easily with other tools. It has to be built in a secure way that can run a lot of times, as a SaaS solution, or sometimes often as more of a hybrid approach, right? Where some things are hosted in SaaS, some things are installed on-prem within your network to give you the right level of security for your business needs.
100%. So a bit about how can machine learning help you achieve better observability? What do you think about that one, Peter?
So I first wanted to mention that we are open for questions. So feel free to use the question panel. Absolutely welcome those, and I'd like everyone that's taken the time to join us today. You're absolutely welcome to be part of this discussion and conversation. So feel free to add your thoughts or ask us anything that comes to mind as we're progressing here. So this is probably one of the, I'll say, most recent developments that these teams really struggle because of difficulty in bringing on resources, high turnover many times, and just staying current and having the education and the background to really dive deep into those issues that they're affecting your organization today. And so we need that capability to have the extra expertise that's being applied through the machine learning, and not just basic machine learning, but something that can look across your entire organization. And so too many times what I've seen is that the machine learning checkbox has a check in it, but it was just for this one specific area, or it's just for this, if this happens, then machine learning will kick in and give us a little bit extra. We really need to have all the data in the system, and then have the machine learning be able to look across our entire ecosystem and truly bring back, the complete baselines, all the correlations, those patterns and behaviors, so that when we deviate from those, when there's something, this is not what typically happens in our systems. And maybe it's not something that is an outage or is something that requires a SEV 1 ticket to be issued, but we want to know about it. Why is it changing? Why was there a change in our systems? So that's what I see with the broad capabilities, machine learning, where we can truly provide capabilities and additional knowledge to the organization to really multiply the team's efforts.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting balance to strike there. On one hand, like you mentioned, you want that cross correlation, build all my normal behaviors make sure that nothing deviates from the norm. On the other hand, you don't want to create an alert fatigue by identifying every single thing that is basically deviating. So there's a balance to strike there between something that covers everything and something that helps you get a very pinpointed insight and high probability that you can read and digest. When we think about principles of machine learning and observability, number one is you want to collect as many data sources as you can. And then again, there's a balance to strike between the cost that you're willing to pay and that. Number two is building your organization now as a customer, not as a vendor, to be able to handle these insights. So who are getting those machine learning insights? How do they act when they get them? Do you create a run book that helps you actually handle an incident that is powered by machine learning? Do you know how to read it? Do you know how to translate it and drill down into the data itself and remediate? So these things really are kind of holding machine learning back in our space, in our market, from really giving the value that it can. And there's some part of the vendors there and some part of the customers, I think. There's one question before we jump to the next point. I see a question from Sadun. Is this similar to how SOAR is just SIEM plus machine learning? This is an interesting point. I think that there's the distinction between SOAR and SIEM is many times kind of vague. SIEM is where you hold all the data from all the systems, and it helps you create the threat hunting and the correlations and alerts. But then the SOAR is where you get all the incidents sent and where you automate them and where you create those workflows that help you remediate and solve things faster and report them. So that really kind of connects to what I just mentioned about it's okay to get machine learning insights. It's okay to get alerts and deviations from the norm, but you got to have the right infrastructure to absorb all those insights, turn them into workflows, remediation flows, run books, and automations. So a SOAR would be a layer that sits on top that SIEM, and you, of course, need to apply your logic and your policies into it. So whenever your SIEM that collects everything and understands baselines and correlations detects a deviation from the norm or some kind of signature that needs to trigger or some kind of alert that you created, your SOAR handles it and puts it into the right workflow so the teams can make sure that that incident is actually resolved. So I hope that answers your question, Sadun. Peter, a bit about cases where you've seen machine learning boosting troubleshooting capabilities, capabilities that you've seen in the market, in the companies you've worked for, and specific customer stories maybe on how machine learning powered insight helped the company achieve better observability or better stability?
Yes. So in machine learning, incredibly powerful. And over again, we do see that fantastic use cases where I think the most important is truly bringing out those anomalies that matter to a customer. So when we look at all this data that we have and all these events and whether we want to call them incidents or a notable event or that, what are the ones that rise to the top? What is it that this is something this truly requires my attention? We're all familiar with the alert fatigue. We've seen this over and over again with the accounts that are just overloaded, the email accounts. And it's so hard you almost need an event management capability just for your email system to bring out those needles in that massive email haystack. So whenever we can actually have those events kick off automatically, and I think where I see that applied many times and very successfully is when we can look across different systems so that, when somebody is out of the country and we're getting a login attempt and, could that possibly be accurate? And where the algorithms can actually go and see, yes, whether it's something that within their systems that identifies that truly that employee is out of the country. Okay, we're in good shape there. And then do we allow the login? Possibly we challenge it. And then we do allow them to connect. So there's those things that it's could they be done by a person? Probably, but we just don't have the resources or the time to work through all of those. So
yeah, I think one thing that we've seen in Corelogix that was something that the human beings just can't do, and you got to have the algorithm, is, for instance, the classification algorithm that clusters data and entry and understand the different templates. So it can tell you about an error that happened, that it's a new error. Newly introduced errors is something that human beings just can't do. You get such a huge amount of text to analyze, millions and sometimes billions of events per day. The ability to look at thousands of errors and say, this is new, I haven't seen it before this crisis, and focus on that is something that human beings just can't do. They had to go record by record and read it and try to figure out whether it's a little slightly different or not. So clustering algorithms or distance function algorithms here can be extremely useful to people. And we've seen it multiple times, saving companies from crisis. 5 minutes after deployment, letting them know that new version created an error that we've never seen before. So that for instance is an example of an algorithm that puts out a very specific insight across all your data in a way that is easy to digest and understand what is the impact and what do I do now to solve. And then when you figure it out, when you got that insight, you probably want to drill down deeper. You want to look at more data or extend the information you have to get the full picture. Josh, what are you seeing when you look at companies and how they try to deep dive? What do you see companies doing right or wrong, or what type of tools extend that capability?
Yeah. It's a good question. So yeah, typically organizations that we talk to are using, some type of logging, observability, APM tools, tracing tools that allow them to glean some piece of information, right? You get an alert on an outlier, something that's deviating from what you're typically normally seeing. What happens then is, developers will typically start to get involved. They'll need to go in and start to kind of debug and figure out what's going on at a deeper level within the code that they're writing, right? So, what I think the challenge often is that, developers get involved and they need to locally reproduce an issue that's occurring in a staging environment or a production environment, something that's reported by their customers potentially. It can be very challenging to set up an environment where those things are easily reproducible. So, what a lot of organizations are adopting are these remote debugging solutions, things that allow them to get access to the data within their application, really at the code level, as it's running, being able to go into a production environment and find out, my customer logged into their account, they did these 3 actions. What's actually happening behind the scenes. Traditionally, that's a very lengthy approach. They have to write new logs, they have to push new builds, and they go through this process that can be very slow and time consuming, requires developers to do a lot of context switching. And what they can get now with these new capabilities is ability to go right to the source of the issue and find out what's going on.
So basically, debug production like you would on your private dev environment?
Exactly right. Very, very similar experience. In just a bit, I'll actually touch on just a very quick example of how they can do that.
It's very funny. We see that many times, that observability, unlike many other tools, you get less the more data you have. So it becomes more difficult to understand what's happening. And a lot of the algorithms, like clustering the data into templates, detecting anomalies, dynamic alerts, ratio alerts, all these things, and of course, searches and dashboards are there to minimize data, because unlike, for instance, BI and statistics in general or marketing information, the more you have, the more accurate you are. If you're trying to track behavior of users in your application or your website, if you don't have enough, you don't know anything. Unlike observability, if my system in production have generated 10 logs every day, I'd have complete observability. I know everything. The more I have, the more difficult it is. And then you want to take me back to the as primary as you can in my development cycle to be able to understand what happened. So for instance, Rookout definitely being able to put a breakpoint suddenly in production log regression by Corelogix, taking me to the template, to the printf of my log to see the parameters and see how many times it happened and how it behaved. These are things that in essence, and I guess this is part of the reasons the two companies combined well, is the understanding of I as a user want as less data as I can to get to the bottom of things. And don't give me another 1,000 ways to slice the data or visualize it. Just give me that one thing that I need to figure out what happened. Because not many people work in observability, but many people are engineers. So that's a really good point.
Exactly. Information and data overload is definitely a real thing.
Exactly. Now, in this workflow, what we'll try to do is show how you gain complete observability. We'll try to do that real quick. And you guys ask us questions in the middle, because the important thing here is the experience and what we're trying to explain on how we do the troubleshooting, not the demo itself. But we obviously won't demo that on other products. So stay involved. And Peter will show how we go from an alert or an anomaly to drill into the logs, identify potential areas. And then Josh will show how do you investigate, add, and then add more context information and then resolve. Peter?
Thanks, Ariel. So you wanted to introduce everybody to the main Corelogix screen. This would be a very typical screen that you may see when you're logging in, taking a look at what's going on in my environment right at this minute. So I have a lot of capabilities here that I've never had before in my career with those, what do I have going on? Not only do I see my alerts, which is very typical, but any anomalies that may have come out in the system, those are going to be brought front and center right here. The top 3 errors that I'm seeing in the system right now, that's what's right there, front and center, ready for me to take a look at. Any specific widgets that I've put together, I have all of that directly here, one pane of glass, able to look at what's going on across my entire organization at this anytime. So let's take a look at what might actually be going on there. So even though I don't have the anomalies in the last 24 hours, we can go back and take a look at one that recently happened. I can just go ahead and click on that and bring that up. And so what's incredibly powerful here is that all I had to do was send the logs into Corelogix. And yeah, as has kind of been mentioned, what's really nice about a true cloud native observability platform is that ability to send all of the data in, the full elasticity that cloud provider has to scale up for whatever volume that I may need to send in. And that's going to allow all of the data to be observed and analyzed. And as Ariel mentioned, a very powerful part of the Corelogix platform is that analysis is happening immediately, and we are doing that to all of the data. So what happens is that roughly after a week, I'm able to get a true baseline, really see the patterns, the behaviors, the correlations of all the logs that represent the systems throughout my environment. And here I see in this outer band what we typically have going on in the environment. Now we went outside of that a little bit. What actually happened here? I have something, not huge above normal, but it is above normal. And is this something that needs to be investigated, needs to be looked at? But it's definitely something that I want to know about. And the great part was I didn't have to do any sort of writing machine learning, pulling out R libraries or Python libraries and trying to decipher, should I try and connect this with that? Corelogix was able to do all of that for me and bring these anomalies to the surface so that here's when I look at the top error logs, and then I'm able to pull out the suspected error from what was different. Here's, these are all coming across. I do see I have a lot of error logs in here, but I do have one here. This one is unique. I'm bringing that out front and center as the suspected error for what's going on in these environments. So when you look at observability and really why are we all so focused on that, get that mean time to resolution down, significantly reduce that. And that's what we see here is that through the machine learning algorithms, we were able to pull out one, here's the anomaly. Here's the suspected errors associated with that. Here's the top errors that I'm seeing at that time. And then, and I think we've mentioned it already in this call, but that newly introduced capability, extremely powerful. This is something we have not seen before in the environment. And that was something that in all my previous monitoring positions, I've always had to rely on tribal knowledge to understand that, what is that? Has anyone seen that before? The messages are going around. Have you seen, do we ever get? And here it's front and center. I see it immediately. So that provides an excellent way to, something's going on here in the environment. I can go ahead and click on logs and go directly to, here's what's going on in the last 24 hours. I imagine most of you on this call have used a tool that's probably not too different. I'll bring out some of the highlights that we have here is that, when you do look at this information, we have the logs coming in. One of the great features of the Corelogix platform is that you truly can bring in everything from the different environments. We're not requiring the storage of that data at this point. We do analyze immediately upon ingest. So as we talked about before, the ability to use those algorithms to take that data, and we can generally do this in less than a day that we're seeing that data come through. We're figuring out, here's the items that are constant in those values. Here's some things that we see as a variable, allows us to significantly reduce the size associated with those logs. And once we do that, then that provides a tremendous increase in speed back to the users that are looking at these logs. So when you see something like this, certainly 2 million of these, what does that really mean? We can go ahead and take a look at the occurrences, and we see here's the normal behavior. So what typically happens for these logs, but here's certainly some spiky behavior in there. And maybe that's a great place to start looking at those times and see what's happening at that point. Why am I seeing that so far above what is the normal behavior? So that comes out very quickly within the logs. And so another piece I wanted to take a look at. So it's great that, we had some help in finding that anomaly. We can drill directly into the information around what's happening at that point. But then you also have additional capabilities. And if you certainly can look at the Corelogix website, there's all sorts of integrations listed on there. Today, we're going to take a look at if we have this integrated into our development environment. And here we had a new version, something that was released. This is what exactly happened here. So what we see, okay, here's, I see some changes here. Maybe, what happened in triggered alerts. We're kind of off the charts here. So we have some, certainly an alert volume spike that has happened at that point. We get a lot of information coming back from that. When we look at what's going on with the current tag, if we wanted to compare these to even earlier releases and what happened over the last 10 hours, we look at the alerts associated with that. So it's extremely powerful, great information for both, as a manager of a team or for the team to use. Here's where we can see exactly what's going on with those different systems. Here's some huge error anomalies. Again, bringing out front and center within my environment. So and then what was introduced at this point. And then I see that we actually have a problem here with, looks like connection errors have, something is going on. One error seems to be really taking over here. And so this tells us, okay, this is really where we want to dive down, take a close look, see what's happening here. And so at this point, I'd like to pause, because in the real world, this is what we see quite often. And the logs have given us a tremendous amount of information. There's certainly a lot more we could do directly at this point to take a closer look at it, Slack with our teammates. But what I'd like to do is see, let's take a look at what a specific tool might be able to bring back and deliver to the teams. in terms of analysis and debugging and really finding that root cause and getting the systems back online, making the customer experience just as incredible as possible. So, Josh, do you want to go ahead, and I'll stop for a second and see how a person may take this information and then actually dive deep into the development environment?
So at this point, what we saw an anomaly. We drilled down to the data. We saw abnormal behavior of some of the templates. We went to the latest version that we've upgraded, and we saw some areas where we're considering to have problems in that latest version. We can decide whether we want to roll back or release a hot fix. We see the suspected errors, newly introduced errors in this version. And now we want to get additional information and context to resolve this faster. And then Josh and Rookout come in.
Exactly. So once we've kind of investigated that issue, developers will typically get involved to kind of dive deeper, understand what's happening, identify the area within their code that's potentially having a problem, and then they go about debugging that, right? So, what typically happens during that process, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is developers will typically dive in, they'll look in the server logs. If there's not enough information there, they'll dive deeper, maybe adding additional logs to their code, pushing new builds. And it's an iterative process that kind of goes, over and over again until the issue is identified. So what we can now do with a remote debugging solution is we could say, hey, I'm going to go directly into my production environment, and I'm going to collect some data on the underlying state of my application while it's running, without pushing any new builds, without redeploying, without having to restart or change context. The developer can immediately go in as part of their traditional workflow and start to debug that application. And what that looks like is something like this. So I have a Java app that's out here that's running. It's a remote running app in the cloud. It's actually running on Kubernetes, and it's a basic to-do app. So users can add items to the list. And once Corelogix has drilled us into a specific area, I now want to go in and I want to remotely debug that on the fly. So I can simply go in. I can identify which server, process, or microservice could be causing those issues. I can immediately drill into that specific instance, and I'll click Let's Go. Typically, you're keyed into the area from within those logs. And what I'll do now is come in and I'll start to debug that application in a approach that's very, very similar to what you would be used to as a developer debugging in your local IDE, right? So you can actually connect to your source code repository, whether it's Git, Bitbucket, whatever it might be. You can pull in the source code into your local environment and start to open up your code and drill in deeper. What that basically means is you can come into any line of the code which you'd like to gather more information from. So once you've identified that general area, you now say, okay, I want to actually see what my application is doing while it's running in production. So I could say, okay, I'm going to click on line 45 and set what we call a non-breaking breakpoint. So it's a very similar experience to a breakpoint within your IDE, except this time it's not actually breaking or stopping your application. So I can simply set one of those data collection points. I can come in and start to interact with my application, just like a normal customer would. And when I come back, I can see that I actually got some data from my application. I can click on that message and I can start to drill in deeper to that more detailed information. So I can collect information on all of the local variables, all of their values, information that developers will typically need to get to the root cause of an issue. You can then take that data, you can search through the process, can look at stack traces, pull in tracing information from your tracing tools to give you additional context about a specific tracing ID or tracing spans. You can correlate that data to the systems that you're using today. Once you've kind of drilled into that data, you can do things like, okay, I want to set a conditional to only find specific data that I'm interested in seeing. Maybe it's data from a specific customer account that you're trying to debug. We talked about this concept of data overload, right? You don't simply just want to collect all the data all at once and just pull everything in. It might be too much to handle. So I can say, if I get a specific variable with this value, maybe a session or a customer ID, only then I want to see that specific data. So I can set those things. I can take this data, I can pipe it back to Corelogix. I can send it to any logging or monitoring system that you might be using today. Send it to Slack, Microsoft Teams for alerts, anything like that. I can take the data. I can apply data masking rules, so you're properly following your organizational security policies and things like that. So really, kind of what we saw there is you have the ability to immediately go into a system. Kind of bringing it back to the picture that you saw here. You have the ability to very quickly go in, understand what's happening by providing insights and information on a potential issue, and then dive directly to the root of the problem by diving in and using a remote debugging solution where you can then drill in on the issue, and then go back, analyze, and resolve that issue by pushing a new code change or whatever that might be.
And when you push that new code change, you can click that version benchmark tag that Peter showed and see if that new version resolved the issue or not. So you can create your custom widget, for instance, on an error, and then look at that benchmark and see how that error behaved in the previous version versus the current version, and see if it's actually resolved or not. So this is how you close the loop. I see we have a question here from the audience. What's necessary to set up the Rookout Corelogix within my application? So real quick on Corelogix, we have over 100 integrations, whatever cloud you're using, whatever documents you want to read, whether it's a standard logging agents like Logstash, FluentD, FluentBit, Kubernetes Stack, AWS, GCP, Azure, contextual data or CDNs like Fastly, Cloudflare, Akamai, really over 100 integrations, and there's even a REST API so you can send from anywhere. Josh, how do I get Rookout in my production?
Yeah, so if you guys are using, I know a lot of organizations are using APM tools today, so it's a very similar approach. You either attach an agent to your running application, or there's an SDK where you basically add the Rookout SDK as a dependency to your application, depending on which language that you might be using. Once you've attached it to your application, it's basically running alongside your app just as another dependency like any other component would.
Cool. And by the way, Josh, I can send the data from Rookout directly to Corelogix, right? They're both plugged in.
You could, yeah. So any third-party tool, Corelogix, of course, that accepts a REST API, we can take that data that we collect and we can pipe it back to any of those tools. Absolutely.
Awesome. That's a nice way to close the loop. And we're being conscious of time. So I mentioned the integrations of Corelogix for logs. We also have a matrix product and security product, but these are out of the scope here of the observability and debugging. Another question, how long do you store the data for Corelogix? So Corelogix stores the data according to the retention our customers require, but we have this nice thing that is unique to Corelogix in the market that allows you to query your remote S3 using any free text or even the Elasticsearch syntax for data that was never indexed. So you can send the data directly from Corelogix to your S3 and query it on any time frame. So basically you determine your retention. And our dashboards are always set for a year's retention. So you can look at long-term trends. Another question, does Rookout support on-prem deployments if I have sensitive data? Josh.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a couple of different models that you can deploy Rookout with. One is a pure SaaS-based approach. If you don't necessarily have a lot of PII or sensitive data that you don't mind Rookout storing for a very short period of time. If PII and data security and keeping that data within your network is critical for your business, we do have an approach where you can actually deploy components on-prem. So all of that application-specific data stays locally within your network. So really, you can deploy based on your needs.
That's great. Thank you very much, Josh. Any other questions? Yeah, we have another one. Does Rookout have any impact on the performance?
Sure. So yeah, that's a good question. That's one that we actually get quite a bit. Typically, performance overhead is under 1%, so it's typically very, very minimal. I like to compare it to APM tools, where in terms of where we're different. APM tools are often kind of running in the background, collecting a lot of information filtering those up to dashboards. And we take a little bit of a different approach in that we try to do as little as possible within your application until you tell us to, right? So you saw these non-breaking breakpoints that we're setting. By default, we're actually not doing anything and have negligible overhead, almost zero impact. Once you start setting those non-breaking breakpoints, overhead is still very minimal. It's about the same as if you were to add a log line into your code at that specific point in time. So overhead is typically very, very, very minimal.
Okay. What's Corelogix pricing structure? Okay. About pricing in Corelogix, basically it's a little different. Like Pierre here mentioned, Corelogix doesn't force you to store all the data in order to analyze it. So unlike other tools that ingest, then they have to index everything and then run aggregations and scheduled queries and all for alerts. Corelogix does everything in real time in the Kafka pipeline with the service we created called Streama. So that includes the stateful transformations. And that means, first of all, our indexes are much faster and more efficient because they only do user queries. But second, we allow you to decide whether you just want to analyze, visualize, get alerts and anomalies and version benchmarks on your data without storing it and then querying it directly from your S3, or do you need it frequently searched? So that gives you a new way of determining how much you pay per record, per application, subsystem, and severity. See one from Serge. What is typically the latency of seeing application logs in GKE, AKS, EKS directly using kubectl logs versus seeing the queryable application log in the dashboard UI and Sumo Logic? Notice it's varying. Oh, okay. So I think in what you're seeing there, you mentioning in Sumo Logic, I think it's extreme. From my experience with Sumo Logic, it's a little less than that. You're mentioning that you're seeing 5 to 10 minutes delay from the moment you see it in kubectl logs versus in the Sumo UI. In Corelogix, what I can tell you, we have two ways of seeing the data. There's the live tail. Live tail is a live stream of data, pre-indexed, pre-analyzed. So live tail in Corelogix, you'll see in under 3 seconds. You can also consume it not only via the UI, but also via CLI. And in the application itself, if you choose to index the data, then it'll be between 0 to 35 seconds delay from the moment you see it in kubectl and the moment you see it indexed in Corelogix. Alerts are real-time, dashboards are real-time. Real-time is, in log data near real-time, so about 5 seconds. So to summarize, 3 seconds live tail, 0 to 35 seconds in the log index, and 5 to 10 seconds for dashboards and alerts.